Doctors of Reddit. What was the most overdramatic or underdramatic patient you ever had? Farmers are notorious for being underdramatic. Had a farmer a while ago who was up a tree for some reason and fell out. As bad luck would have it, someone had left a dirty meat hook at the bottom in the tree and he landed on it, impaling his butt cheek. He proceeded to pull it out, finish what he was doing, drive himself home and go to bed. The only reason he came to hospital was because his wife woke up to a bed full of blood and insisted he get that looked at. Med student here. In my OBGYN clerkship, this woman came in pretty hesitantly at the urging of her girlfriend for pelvic pain. She apologized if she was wasting our time and said it was probably nothing. This poor lady had a cyst the size of my head on her ovary that caused torsion, twisting and cutting off blood supply. She was rushed into surgery but lost that ovary. People say it's more painful than childbirth, and here she was apologizing to us. I once cared for a repeat self-harmer that put a knife into their neck. Regretted it, taped it in place, and bicycled to the hospital. A few miles. Past carfuls of normal people. Parked the bike. Walked into triage to check in. Through a waiting room of grannies and kids and men with chest pain. With a kitchen paring knife duct taped in place sticking straight out. CT scan later showed that the tip of the blade was 2 millimeters from the carotid artery. My stepson broke his leg on a jump while skiing. He put his skis back on and came down the mountain. He told his dad he had fallen pretty hard, but wasn't in much pain. The next day he said his leg was clicking when he walked. Sure enough, he had fractured both bones in the lower leg. I was in my last week of school as a rad tech student and a patient came in through the ER for a series of x-rays. He claimed to have fallen down some stairs and we basically had to x-ray both legs from the knee down. Reader. I have never met a bigger, whinier baby. He moaned and groaned and flinched at the lightest touch. Refused to hold still. Would not straighten his legs. Complained about the table and x-ray cassette being too hard. There were no visible injuries aside from a few scrapes and nothing obvious on the x-rays. He was still convinced that he would never walk again and had broken both legs irreparably. Funniest part was that we had a different patient come in on the same day with a similar complaint. He actually had fractures in both legs and feet and was very calm and cooperative for the x-rays despite his injuries. We were doing paternity testing for an apparently extremely acrimonious case of your son impregnated my daughter. No, he didn't. Your daughter sleeps with lots of other boys. Each side sent a lawyer to the appointment. Each lawyer had their phone out recording. And followed the blood and cheek swabs from collection. Through the lab for DNA extraction. Performing the test in our PCR room. And watching me analyze the data files, which is exactly as boring as it sounds. It's like, dude. We're the neutral third-party lab here. We have literally zero interest in the outcome of the case. You don't need to be so dramatic. All the chain of custody stuff is documented. We have a second observer signing off on sample IDs. We're not going to risk lose our license by accepting a bribe from either set of parents. Nad, my dad's story. Old guy that needed a pacemaker. Worked a farm in Utah, I think. He realized at some point that when he started having an episode he could just grab the electric fence and it would stop. So this badass just ran fencing everywhere he could on his property and grabbed the fence if he had an issue. Been doing this for months if not years. Thanked my dad for putting in the device saying how he can finally get out to areas of his property that he couldn't run fence to. Nad. Young trauma patient 17 T-boned by a garbage truck. Moving him onto the CT table he said ow and silent tears came down his face. Then he apologized for complaining. And thanked us profusely. Turns out he had a few broken vertebrae. Broke half his ribs. And had a fractured hip and clavicle. Kid whimpered a few times during the CTS. And again apologized when we came back in. Like, dude. You could scream in my face and I'd understand. There was a guy who attempted suicide by firing a nail gun into his ear. I took care of him in the ICU and he remembers everything. He'd been depressed a long time and decided to end it. Nailed himself. Sat around a while before deciding he didn't want to die. Drove himself to the ER. Walked inside and fainted. It was so weird how stoic he was about it all. Not my story but a co-worker's. Said she cared for a patient that works in a circus. They did a similar act where the guy shoots an arrow to get the apple off her head. Well, it went in through her neck. She said she came to the ICU calm as a cucumber and was talking and answering questions appropriately with a beeping arrow impaled in her neck. Overdramatic, I couldn't even begin to describe this. The percentage of the population who cannot cope with life is ridiculously high. I regularly see young adults hysterically crying because they have a cold or some small injury. Sure. I get it hurts and you don't feel great. But come on. Underdramatic, the one that stands out was on an OB/GYN rotation when I was in school. This stoic Eastern European lady went into labor while she was at work earlier in the day. Apparently she never called her husband to tell him. So there she is. About to start pushing. And her husband calls her. She just says, "I'm having the baby." Then there is some pause where he says something. She replies, "No. You stay there with other child's name. I'll be home tomorrow." Then she hung up. And pushed out a baby. German paramedic here. Had an alarm for an heart attack. So. We drive out to the patient's address. And are greeted by a middle-aged gentleman with a patient's chart and a suitcase. Of course. One would suspect an family member of a patient with known problems. But no. He said he is the patient. He is having an heart attack right now. His only symptoms were a slight itch on the spine. We were understandably annoyed and disbelieving. In the ambulance on the ECG, however, we got fast. That guy. Talking with my colleague. While I fixed the meds. Had such an massive heart attack that it would kill him in an hour or less. He was chill all the time. Joking and telling stories. Right up to the CPU. Not a DR but a firefighter/EMT. Most underdramatic. Dispatched with law enforcement for an assault with injuries. Get near the scene and was cleared by PD that the scene was safe while they were actively searching for the assailant and that our patient was sitting on the bench of the bus stop. Guy was about 30 years old with a decent laceration on his face but nothing major. Stated he was jumped by some guy in the bushes out of nowhere and had to fight him off. He didn't really complain about his laceration too much and stated his back was a little sore and that he feels fine and didn't want to go to the hospital. Vitals all looked good and he appeared fine. But just to be safe I wanted to give his whole body a look over to be sure he didn't have any other lacerations, and God was I glad I did. As I pulled this guy's large coat off winter at night, I see a knife protruding from his lower right back with a slow but steady stream of blood coming out. Guy was as shocked as I was. We had a dude who had compound fractures in both lower legs. He was pretty chill until the ketamine hit and he didn't react well. Story was that he was arguing with his girlfriend. Tried to leave. She stood in front of the door and said something along the lines of either go through me or off the balcony. He chose off the balcony. 40 feet up. That's my first and so far only time seeing bones stick out of someone. So we're in this small treatment center in a small island in Greece. Night shift. And this guy comes in through the ER door. Now I want you to imagine the most typical bulky Russian guy. 2 meters tall. Wide as a bull and just straight up menacing. This is the guy you see in movies bouncing at a mob club. So he's walking slowly towards us. And in broken Greek he says tummy hurt with the most thick Russian accent. He's holding his abdomen and has a sour face. Looking like he has some GI issues. So we point him to the internal medicine room after he does the paperwork. He takes his time. Reaches the bed and just sits there. Chilling. We ask what's wrong. Again. Same answer. Just a small tummy hurt. Yeah. He was shot 3 times. And I'm pretty sure he walked it off. Came here on his own and the only thing he figured he should say is a chill tummy hurt like it's a Tuesday and he had some indigestion. Nad. But I think my mom belongs here. When she was pregnant with me, she took a visit to America to visit her parents. One morning, she wakes up in their guest room and goes to take a shower to start getting ready for the day. Halfway through the shower, she realizes, oh speep, the baby is coming. So she sits down on the toilet and delivers me herself. Then goes to wake my dad up to go to the hospital. He was apparently very confused. Panicked. And called 911. Somehow the news got involved too. We have a tape of me at like 1 hour old on the news and my mom is very calm. Just talking to the reporter. Underwhelming. Not a doctor. But I work in a hospital. I had a patient that did not believe the coronavirus was a real thing. She did not believe that COVID-19 was real. What was she there for, you ask? COVID-19. She believes she has pneumonia. But doesn't believe that COVID caused it. She refuses remdesivir, Decadron, zinc. The only thing she accepted was oxygen. Because she couldn't breathe.